بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, and in particular on the last of them all, the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brother Chairman, Brother Sean Daly, my learned and distinguished colleague Piero San Giorgio, I'm honored to conduct this seminar jointly with him today on preparing for nuclear war. He is going to do the substance of the subject, preparing for nuclear war, and I will explain the subject, explaining nuclear war. I once asked my teacher, Maulana Fadlur Rahman Ansari rahimahullah, that the Quran says that it has come for those who have fear of God in their hearts. That's how it starts. So I said, what about the rest? So he pointed up to the sky and he said, look at the stars above. For most people, they're just beautiful up there. That's all. Beauty. Twinkling stars. We have a distinguished poet in our gathering here tonight. He writes poetry in Arabic. But when Allah speaks about the stars in the sky in the Quran, He says they're there for more than that. The stars are there to guide you, if you know how to read them. If you can look at the stars as a whole, connect the stars together, get the big picture, then when you are in the middle of the ocean, navigating a ship, you can look up at the stars and see which way to go. The verses of the Quran are like that, and so too history. There are those who look at the historical process and they see only events, and they remember names and they remember dates. And they say, but perhaps the world is just moving this way and that way. Like a piece of wood in the ocean, the wave is turning, tossing it this way and that way. That history is just moving in any direction it chooses to move. But then there are others who usually don't watch television. That's why they can think. And because they are people who can think, they're able to connect the dots of history. And they're able to see a pattern emerging in history. And read history differently from that which is presented in the history books. And such people look at the world today and say we are on the brink of some big catastrophic event. And these are not people who are simply Christians or Muslims or so. Piero is secular in his thinking. Piero wrote to me a few years ago and said, I don't understand it. How come? You from religion and I from the secular world, and we came to some conclusions. So that Allah gives His light to whomsoever He chooses. And with that light you can read and connect the dots of history and understand where we are and anticipate what's coming. It's like dry wood and you just need a match. That's what it is now in northern Syria. those who created what is called the Islamic State, ISIS, and what I call the bogus Islamic State, are now in a quandary because they created this after great planning, and they had a great design, and they're pursuing momentous aims and objectives with this ISIS. But now it faces collapse. The Russian intervention in Syria is bringing ISIS to a close. It's bringing down the curtain on ISIS. And they can't allow that to happen. They are a people who have, excuse my blunt language, they are a people who have PhDs in hypocrisy. They tell monumental lies and then put on their best suits and go to church on a Sunday morning. Or go to the masjid on Friday. Without any shame and embarrassment. They created ISIS. And now they want us to believe that they are bombing ISIS. But because ISIS is collapsing, because the insurrection, the armed insurrection that was planned, meticulously planned in Syria, is now falling apart. And the army of the Syrian people, not the one that came from outside and is paid $1,000 a day, the mercenary army. The army of the Syrian people, whether it is Christian or whether it is Muslim or whatever it is, the army of the Syrian people is now winning the war. That's why we now have arrived at a flashpoint. We begin our presentation today in explaining nuclear war by advising that we look to two cities in particular, Aleppo in northern Syria and Mosul in northern Iraq. They cannot allow either of these two cities to fall. No. So that we are now faced with the possibility, maybe another few days, maybe another few weeks, and we know whether my talk has substance in it, that NATO's very important member called Turkey, led by President Erdogan, is likely to launch an attack on Syria in order to stave off defeat. And that Saudi Arabia is likely to be part and parcel of that attack. If that attack takes place, will it take place with the consent and blessings of NATO? Or will Turkey and Saudi Arabia be moving out on their own, hoping that NATO will intervene? That's the question I cannot answer. I don't think anyone can answer that question. And so there are two possibilities. This is the micro-analysis before we proceed with the macro-analysis. There are two possibilities: that we can be facing a war which is going to be limited in scope, in which NATO may decide not to intervene, and Turkey and Saudi Arabia will have to fight it out on their own, and they're going to lose that war. Russia will defeat them. If such a scenario, and now I have to choose my words with particular care, if such a scenario were to emerge, this is the first option, then at the end of such a limited war, the outcome would not be difficult for us to envisage, namely that Iran will be the dominant actor in that entire region. That the Saudi royal family would have to exit from the stage of history. And that most likely ISIS will find a home in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca and Medina. But ISIS is a particularly venomous snake. And it seems to have been created with a particularly major objective of inciting and fomenting Shia-Sunni civil war in the world of Islam. And so an ISIS taking control of Arabia will be the bait, which I hope and I pray that Iran does not bite. Because if Iran were to foolishly bite that bait and to ever launch an attack on Arabia, then those who created ISIS will get what they wanted, namely Shia-Sunni civil war in the world of Islam, and the major beneficiary will be the State of Israel. I will myself use my voice as powerfully as I can to condemn Iran if Iran were to ever make such a stupid mistake as to launch an attack on Arabia. The second possibility, and we must move quickly now, is that if Turkey launches an attack on Syria, as we expect soon, then NATO would intervene. Because Turkey is a NATO member state and there are legal obligations if a NATO member state is at war. And if NATO intervenes, well, then we're going to have the world war. If the world war takes place, of course it's going to be nuclear war. And if it's nuclear war, then only the nuclear scientists really will be able to tell us what's going to happen to the world if a nuclear war takes place. But we're hoping that Piero will be able to at least give us some help in understanding what kind of a world will it be if a world war takes place. And now for Islamic eschatology and what it has to say concerning world war. We are familiar with what the Prophet said. Allah's blessings be upon him. It's just that we don't put it into context. Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, said that the river Euphrates will one day uncover a mountain of gold. And people will fight for that gold. And 99 out of every 100 who fight for the gold would be killed. And each would say, I will be the one who will survive. But those who believe in the one God should not touch that gold. We have recognized this to be religious symbolism. And last August in our seminar right here in Geneva, we offered an interpretation that the mountain of gold is not to be understood as a metal, mountain of metal. There are those, of course, who insist on a literal understanding, and hence they're waiting for the mountain of the metal to come out from underneath the river. But we say no, it is religious symbolism. And in 1974, an ocean of oil underneath the river began to function as a mountain of gold. An ocean of oil underneath the river, Euphrates, began to function as a mountain of gold. When? How? When Henry Kissinger got King Faisal to agree to this amazing request that oil should be sold. What an arrogant request. What an arrogant request. That oil should be sold for only US dollars. And they say, we are the people who have given you the free market. Really? Is this a free market? Have you no shame? Have you no shame? Is this a free market? That if I want to buy oil with gold, I cannot buy it, even with gold. I can't buy it with anything else other than US dollars. When Faisal agreed to that, and then he got the other Arab oil producing countries to agree, and then OPEC came into being as the greatest achievement of the Zionist movement. And OPEC also instituted this. Then something came into being called the petrodollar. And the prophecy of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam materialized. But he said they're going to fight over that mountain of gold. Watch it, what the Prophet said. That fight is coming into being now, that fight is about to take place because of BRICS. Because BRICS is a threat to the petrodollar monetary system. And Russia is the leader of BRICS. Without Russia, China would not be there. And without Russia and China, forget it. India and Brazil and South Africa are just little boys. And so, from our eschatological perspective, the big war is coming. And we can see and understand there's going to be the war over the mountain of gold. And so Ukraine is a sideshow. Syria is a sideshow. The mountain of gold is the cause of the war. In order to maintain their rule over the world, they must maintain their rule over money. You cannot rule the world unless you rule the world of money. And you cannot rule the world of money so long as mankind is using gold and silver as money. No. You've got to get rid of gold and silver as money because this is money with intrinsic value. This is real money. And you've got to replace it with something called monopoly money. Someone else called it toilet paper money. One of the reasons why they want to rule the world of money and hence rule the world is because of a messianic interpretation of history. Christianity, Judaism and Islam all say the same thing, that the historical process is going to end with the Messiah. And the Messiah will rule the world from Jerusalem. But before the Messiah rules the world from Jerusalem, there is one who will seek to impersonate the Messiah. He's known as the Antichrist. In Islam, he's known as Dajjal. I'm writing a book on Dajjal now, but some of you don't want me to finish this book. So many emails. So I have to keep on replying. I regret I cannot respond while I'm writing my book. In order for him to successfully impersonate the Messiah, he has to rule the world. He has to rule the world. And he has to rule the world from Jerusalem. But the Messiah was not sent to the American people, nor was the Messiah sent to the Swiss. The Messiah was sent to the Israelite people, the Jews. And so they have to be convinced that you are the Messiah if you want to make a claim. In order for him to convince the Jews that he is the Messiah, and if you've read Jerusalem in the Quran, you'll be familiar with this eschatological analysis. Number one, he has to liberate the Holy Land for the Jews. He couldn't do that so long as the world of Islam had a caliphate. So long as the world of Islam had Darul Islam, one consolidated mass, a mighty army. So in order for him to liberate the Holy Land, he has to get rid of the caliphate. He did it with exquisite design. Exquisite design. An institution which has been there in the world of Islam for 1400 years. How to get rid of it? It is part of the deen, the religion, how to get rid of the caliphate. And then get the Muslims to forget the caliphate. Of course, that's what television does. What it did was to create the Ottoman Empire, Dajjal. If you are a supporter of the Ottoman Empire and you cannot as yet read history, I suggest you go back and study your book. The Ottoman Empire was then empowered with a power that could not be matched by its enemies. No. Where did it get that power from? And then the Ottoman Empire expanded until it took Arabia and took Mecca and Medina, and then claimed the caliphate and carried it to the capital city of the Orthodox Christian world. There are many things that are strange that occurred in history. This one beats them all. To take the capital of the world of Islam and go and pack it up in the capital of the Orthodox Christian world, this one beats them all. And then when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the caliphate collapsed with it. That was the grand design. In order for them to be able to liberate the Holy Land, they had to break up the world of Islam. And that's what happened with the First Great War. The First Great War, the First World War, from an eschatological perspective, achieved these objectives. It got rid of the caliphate, and it broke up the world of Islam into bits and pieces at mutual war with each other, antagonism with each other, and gave it a virus called nationalism. And this virus caused them to have rivalry with each other. Exquisite planning, incidentally. Exquisite planning. The First World War, therefore, allowed them, a British army, to conquer Jerusalem. And guess who the British had fighting with them in the British army? They had Arabs. They had, today it's called Pakistan. They had many Punjabis fighting in their army. Oh yes. I mean, you have to give Jack his jacket. The British were brilliant. Brilliant in making fools of these people. And they're doing it again today now with ISIS. Not only did the First World War achieve this objective of neutralizing the world of Islam, but there is another threat to them. And that comes from another part of the Christian world which has an equal claim to Jerusalem. And that's the Orthodox Christian world. And guess what happened in the First World War? We don't have the time to go through that history tonight. But they were able to neutralize the Orthodox Christian world. That was the Bolshevik Revolution. That was communism. And that was the world's first atheist state, which waged war on the Orthodox Christian people, destroying their monasteries, destroying their churches, killing them, slaughtering them, pushing atheism down their throats. That was the Soviet Union. And so both the two possible threats to them were neutralized. The First World War. Was it 20 million Russians were killed in the First World War? Then came the Second World War. If we look at it from an eschatological perspective, Britain now has control over the Holy Land. Britain is the mandate power. And while pretending to keep the European Jews out, Britain is allowing them in. Before Israel could be born in 1948, you had to have a Second World War. So the First World War had to come to an end in such a way that there's unfinished business. And so they imposed humiliating conditions on Germany in the Treaty of Versailles, I believe it was. And so they sowed the seeds for Germany to want revenge, for a Hitler to emerge eventually, because the German people felt very, very, very much hurt over the unjust way they were being treated. When the Second World War took place, the objective of the Second World War is, number one, to allow the State of Israel to come into being. But before the State of Israel comes into being, you must have a United Nations organization and a Security Council for world government to protect Israel. World government to protect that baby who's about to be born. You need the International Monetary Fund for the financial slavery that we now have. So they had all of these things put in place at the end of the Second World War. The Second World War was also fought in order to open the door for millions of European Jews in the Soviet Union and other parts of Eastern Europe to migrate to the Holy Land to Israel. But when people are comfortable where they are living, how do you get them to leave? How do you get the French Jews to leave France and go back to Israel? They don't want to go to Israel. The Jews who are living in France today, they don't want to go. So how do you get the Jews to leave France and go back to Israel? You've got to do something. I ask those who are Jews to think. If you're a Jew, I ask you to think. I want to look forward to the day when someone will write a proper history on Hitler, to connect Hitler with the master plan of creating an environment which will force the Jews and entice the Jews, assist the Jews to leave Europe, to leave Russia, and go to the Holy Land. And then you need a government in charge, in control, and that's what they had in the Soviet Union. The Bolshevik Revolution did not take place without their involvement in it. It was Russian Jews who gave us the Bolshevik Revolution. Wall Street had a lot to do with Bolshevik Revolution. This is history. And so the Soviet Union played a sinister role in facilitating the movement, a massive movement of Russian Jews in particular, to the Holy Land. The Second World War achieved its objective, its eschatological objectives. And now if a Third World War is to take place, well, what do they want from a Third World War? Answer: not only must the Antichrist liberate the Holy Land, he must do that. He must do more than that. He must cause the Jews to return to the Holy Land to reclaim it as their own. He's done that. He must cause a state of Israel to be restored in the Holy Land. He's done that already. But there's one thing left. And that is that state of Israel must become the ruling state in the world. So when they said, all that we want is to find a place for a people to live who do not have a home, that's all, they were telling a big lie. No, they wanted that a state of Israel should be created which will one day rule the world. That's what they wanted. Israel cannot rule the world without another big war. This is our eschatological analysis of the purpose of the coming world war. The immediate objective is to try to preserve the petrodollar monetary system. The Prophet ﷺ did not tell us it's going to survive. He says 99 out of every 100 will be killed in that war. So it doesn't seem as though the petrodollar monetary system is going to survive. Well, then what kind of monetary system will emerge in the wake of a great war? Answer: don't ask me how it will take place, because I don't know. I don't know what a post-nuclear world is going to be. People can't live in these countries anymore. Well then, a post-nuclear world appears to me, to be a world in which Israel can make a claim to be the most powerful state, and therefore the ruling state. And so the Third World War would be the war which will witness the passage from Pax Americana to Pax Judaica. Before I end, there's one more thing that the Third World War can achieve. Our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, prophesied the destruction of the Arabs. Will we be destroyed? She asked. His wife asked. He said, Na'am, yes, you will be destroyed, the Arabs. When will we be destroyed? إِذَا كَثُرَ الْخَبَثِ, when khabath prevails. When rubbish takes over. If you look at the landscape of the Arab world today, if you look at those who lead the Arabs today, and you look back at yesterday, and you see men and women of piety, men and women of integrity, men and women of whom the Arabs were proud, and you look at the vagabonds that we have today, you see this is rubbish. This is rubbish. If Ikhwan was bad, and of course, oh yes, Ikhwan al-Muslimun made so many mistakes that I wish they never rule over Egypt again. This may hurt the feelings of some people. But if you cannot read the constitutional sunnah, then you shouldn't call yourself an Islamic movement. If Ikhwan al-Muslimun was bad, what I tell you, Sisi is much worse. That may hurt the feelings of some of the supporters of the Egyptian government. And so when rubbish prevails, and that's what we have today, rubbish prevailing, the Arabs are going to be destroyed. Well, what about the other force which threatens them, Russia? What's going to be Russia's fate after the World War? I don't have the time, but Surah Al-Kahf tells me that Putin is going to checkmate them. Yes, there's going to be massive destruction of Russia, but Russia will survive. How do we know that? Because the next event which takes place after the Great War, said Prophet Muhammad, Allah's blessings be upon him, and if you're in NATO, you better listen to Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. If you're in Washington, you better listen to this man. He said the next event to occur after the Great War will be the conquest of Constantinople. And the conquest of Constantinople has only one military significance. It liberates the Bosphorus for the Russian Navy. And so Russia will survive the Great War. What happens after that? You read Islamic eschatology and you would know what happens after that. But before I end, they will achieve one more major victory in this coming war. In the First World War, they got rid of the caliphate. That was a great achievement. Because the caliphate had been in existence for 1400 years. But the Hajj has been in existence for thousands of years. The Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, has been in existence from the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So thousands of years, even thousands of years before Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam was born. But there's not going to be any Hajj after the next war. The Hajj will disappear. That's another major victory coming up. How do we know that? Because he prophesied it. Hajj. وَلَا يُؤْتَمَرَنَّ, and people will continue to make the Umrah, the visit. بَعْدَ خُرُوجِ يَأْجُوجَ وَمَأْجُوجَ بَعْدَ خُرُوجِ يَأْجُوجَ وَمَأْجُوجَ. Even after Gog and Magog have been released, people will continue to perform the Hajj. And people will continue to perform the Umrah or the visit to the house. But then he ended by saying, لا تقوم الساعة حتى لا يحج. But the last hour will not come until the Hajj is abandoned. And I am suggesting to you that the abandonment of the Hajj will take place in this coming nuclear war. I hope and pray that this brief introduction to an Islamic eschatological analysis of world wars would provoke the scholars in our midst, because I'm now 74 years of age. But we haven't shown here a graduate of international relations. I hope that it'll provoke you, our budding scholars, to conduct the research and to produce a work on an Islamic eschatological explanation of world wars. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.